And I will continue. Oh, nice. Good call. And I'll continue admitting them in. But thank you guys all for being here, and huge thank you to Charlie for putting this on. And Métis really was the one who arranged all this, so I'm just here to moderate. But a couple reminders: this is not a training for Human Odyssey, so any docents who are not trained in Human Odyssey, this isn't like a training that means you can then engage in there. It is just a informational session to hear about some of the discoveries and all of the research that Charlie and his class and his people like to talk about. And then at the very end, if we have time, we can just have some like open discussion or questions and answers. But we won't be talking about the exhibit, the Human Odyssey exhibit. There are no, as far as I know, there are no plans to update any parts of that exhibit. And so we're just going to leave that topic out of it.
Jen, just a quick question. What's the
Yeah.
time frame? How much time do we get with Charlie today?
We have this scheduled until 3 o'clock. And with that, Charlie's still muted, but I'm going to hand it over to you. There he is.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and everybody can see a review of paleoanthropological discoveries?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so docenting Human Odyssey at the Academy, okay? We've got a couple of new skulls, but we'll go from there. In 1950, there were 8 known hominin species, okay? By 1990, it had jumped to 15. And by 2016, we're up to 31 if you are a splitter as opposed to a lumper when it comes to discovering new hominids. To start off with, there's no possibility of summarizing all the new discoveries in the last 20 years in 1 2-hour talk. So I agreed with Mati that I would be willing, independent of the Academy, to offer 2 more 2-hour talks to cover the paleogenetics evolution and the re-envisaging of Neanderthals. Possibly we can talk about it by email or somehow the same time in the last Mondays in March and April. It would be my suggestion, but I can only cover so much. I have way too many slides, even for this one. What I'm going to try to do today is cover the big ones, at least name them from Sadiba, Flores, Naledi, etc. And then the next talk would be on paleogenetics, and the talk after that would be on Neanderthal, the new revision, and Denisovans. Okay? I want to dedicate this talk to Font Pabo, who invented the field, basically. So hello to him. Who am I? Just in case you don't know me, because I didn't recognize some of you there. I'm a retired neuropsychologist. I worked in psychiatry for 35 years. You would not want to see me professionally because it meant something was not working right with your brain. I started docenting, sorting freshwater snails downstairs in 2009. and then went upstairs to start Human Odyssey. Since COVID beginning, I do a fourth Monday of the month with CAS staff up doing a general science update. You're welcome to join that if you want. And since 2019, I've been teaching a 2-hour once a month class for San Francisco State's OLI on their human evolution interest group. You can join that, but you have to pitch in $50 a year for that. All prior 45 2-hour lectures are downloadable at my website, okay, if you're interested. And I'll put this up on my website as well when we're over. That's my Charles Vella, Comcast.net, Charles J. Vella, PhD.com. And there's my phone number, okay. I caught Don here. Let me see if I can get rid of it. Johansson sneaking around Lucy at the Academy in 2018. He didn't take it. And so some of the most exciting discoveries in human evolution have happened in the last 20 years. This is kind of an update to material in the CAS Human Odyssey exhibit. We're in the process of completing a 15-page addendum to the Human Odyssey manual that is available for me if you're interested. All the citations are in there. The definitive textbook on this topic, I believe, is Richard Klein of Stanford's Human Career. And then also Conroy and Ponser's Reconstructing Human Origins, all right? For popular books, I think there's nothing better than The Fossil Trail. Ian Tattersall, terrific writer. And then most recently, Who We Are and How We Got Here by David Reich of Harvard, talking about the entire ancient DNA related particularly to population genetics and the genetics of human migrations and what that has taught us. And the most recent textbook that I think is probably the best, most up-to-date is this one, The Human Lineage by Cart Mill and Fred Smith. People, when I do my pitch at the Academy, I always show, I have an iPad and I show this slide to remind people how much DNA we all share, and that the kids love the fact that they're share 50% of their DNA with a banana. So this is the famous 1965 early man, the misleading March of Progress picture. Nice picture, great, but humans are not the goal of evolution, okay, despite what the Human Odyssey exhibit may say. Charles Darwin drafted a note to himself saying, never use the words higher or lower. Apes do not appear just so we can morph into humans. We are not the end goal of evolution. We're simply one speck in it. The belief that evolution is about climbing a ladder of ever-increasing biological sophistication is false. Richard Dawkins says evolution can be that, but the reality is usually much less grandiose. Evolution is change gene frequencies in a population. That's it. If for some reason a given gene in a patch of weeds gets slightly more or less common from one generation to the next, then evolution has happened. The gene doesn't have to confer a survival advantage or be adaptive or make the weed fitter. It doesn't have to be selected. It simply has to change in frequency, maybe by chance, and that's about it. So I'm going to skip a few as we go. Stephen Jay Gould pointed out that adaptation most often leads to loss of complexity. So evolution has no goal, no direction. It simply acts on the variation it finds in a biological entity. So forget any hubristic notion that we're the pinnacle of evolution. There is no such thing, okay? And none of our ancestors are trying to be us. We also, in the period before 2 million years ago, there's no consensus as to who the specific hominin ancestor of modern humans is. That's still a contentious event. So my question of where are all the humans? More than 99% of all organisms that have ever lived on the planet are extinct. Few live beyond 1 million years. We're not there yet. I usually comment about the fact that there are 2,000 species of rodents, and in comparison, we've only got 23 species of hominin. We have not found very many. As an example, paleontologically, only 10% of Africa has been explored. So the chances are there are way more hominins. We simply haven't found them. This is one of the oldest mammals around, found in Brazil, 225 million years old. Rodent-sized insect predator who lived in burrows while T-Rex and gang were up on top, stomping around. These are the 5 milestones currently exhibited in the Human Odyssey exhibit. I would comment that this is human Odyssey because, again, this is sort of like the March of Progress picture. You don't need a big brain to be a good example of evolution, only of human evolution. The whole question of when tool making happens, you'll see in a second. Very quick review. 1823, the first Homo sapiens discovered the Red Lady of Pavlodon in Wales. It was a male. The third finding of Homo neanderthalensis was in Feldhofer, Germany. We then see Cro-Magnon. Then we see Pitcairnus Dubois finds it in 1891 in Indonesia. The Mauer jaw is found in Germany, first example of Heidelbergensis. Then the La Chapelle aux Saints Neanderthal in 1908. This is the old man on whom all the bad imagery of Neanderthal began to achieve. Homo erectus Peking man in China. And then the Broken Hill skull in 1921 is important for later discussion. Then we get the Tong child, Australopithecus africanus. Robert Dart, when he took it to London, accidentally left it in a cab, and the police thought they had a murder suspect on their hands. The Malta boy in Siberia, 1927, unknown then, hugely important in terms of ancient DNA, as we'll see. The Nangdong Homo erectus was discovered in 1931, and it is the last exhibit of Homo erectus dated to around 143K. Homo longi has been named only recently because the finder hid him for 80 years in a farmer's well. And now the question is he an example of denisovans? Then in 1959, 1960 at Olduvai Gorge, the Leakeys discover first Paranthropus bosai and then Homo habilis. We'll talk about them. The Homo 1 skull discovered in 1967, Homo sapiens, and now dated to 233K, was the oldest modern human until 2015. Lucy, discovered in 1974, named after the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamond by Don Johansson and gang. The Laetoli footprints. Then in 1978, a skull at Epidema, Greece was found that people now believe is a modern human at 210K, early migration out of Africa. The Denisovan Zia Tibet mandible was discovered in 1980, and protein analysis makes us think that it's Denisovan. Turkana Homo erectus in 1984. And then the Cima de los Huesos in Atapuerca, Spain, are discovered in 92, considered Heidelbergensis. Then Anticisaur shows up, then Littlefoot in South Africa, then Ardi ramidus shows up, then the only Central African Australopithecus was discovered, then the Hurto Homo sapiens skull was discovered, and finally Cananthropus platyops, which we'll see in a second. So currently the thinking is that divergence occurred between us and orangutans around 13 million years ago, between us and gorillas at 9 million years ago, and us and chimps and bonobos around 7 million years ago. Just a comment, the term hominid versus hominin, this is now the preferred current term. It is a group of all modern humans, extinct human species, and all our immediate ancestors. So it includes Homo, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, etc. So it contains only the genus Homo, basically, not orangutans, etc., which are the hominids. I would comment, because this is my favorite theory of why our brains got as big as they did. Robin Dunbar came up with the social brain hypothesis, and what it states is that neocortex size increases with the social group size and complexity, not correlated with ecological variables. So it is our sociality which profoundly influenced who we are, basically. And then gotta mention the mitochondrial Eve hypothesis. Rebecca Kahn at Berkeley came up with the idea that all modern humans descend from a single African woman dated around 200K. 99 to 148K is the most recent. And this was based on a study of mitochondrial haplotype lengths. And so we are all African by DNA. For whoever's in charge, I keep getting Larry Kukin trying to be admitted on my screen, okay? So this concept is that the most recent common female ancestor is what this hypothesis is. It's not the first woman. It's not the last common ancestor. It is one woman among many who had two daughters and ended up being the mother of us all. She is an ancestral genetic, phylogenetic estimate, basically. There is a Y chromosomal Adam who lived, who is our patrilineal descendant from around 120 to 156K. So basically, we are all African by DNA. And an important study looked at heterozygosity, that is how much genetic variation we have. And what they found was that that decreases with distance from East Africa. The further away you get, the less genetic variation you find. And this is all based on the founder effect, that as a group moves away, it always has only a subset of the total original genetic variability that started in Africa. And importantly, the famous bottleneck event around 60K based on a genetic analysis, that there was a founder event in East Asia or Europe associated with our out of Africa dispersal around 60K. So the important point of this is right around the same time that Neanderthal disappeared, we could easily, just as easily, have disappeared as well. That's evolution and the consequences of genetics, basically. I'm going to show what human evolution facts you should generally know in case you get asked at CAS. Interestingly, in the last 3 weeks, after telling them about we are all genetically from Africa, an African-American woman in front of me asked me, Charlie, if we're all genetically originated from Africa, why am I Black and you aren't? Okay, great question. So we ended up talking about latitude, not race, okay? A 12-year-old kid starts crying and says, but what about God? And this week, an 8-year-old boy, evolution is a lie, and then walks away, okay? So great expectations out there. And very quickly, the basic stone technologies, this is the older one, basically a round pebble that's knocked against each other to produce a flake. For the longest time, they were considered the oldest known tools. They're associated originally with Homo habilis and bozai, then Gari, Homo erectus in Asia. This is an Acheulean hand axe that was around for almost 2 million years. It was a great tool, could be as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. And they had cleavers as well, typically associated with erectus and heidelbergensis. The Mousterian tradition is the Neanderthal one. Also the Levallois technique as well, where you clip off a piece. And then the Upper Paleolithic starts showing bladettes, very thin, sometimes beautifully carved, as well as the introduction of bone and wood pieces. These are microblades from around 17,000 K, 17,000. And these are Clovis points from America. And the Upper Paleolithic is typically associated with Homo sapiens, but there are some Neanderthal claims as well. And just published, I have to tell you this, even though this isn't what I was going to cover, a study of Neanderthals at Neumarkt Nord 1 in Germany, a coal mining plant that at 125K, Neanderthals were hunting this, the largest mammal that ever walked the planet. 12 feet tall, 28,000 pounds. 70 of these guys were found at this site. They were systematically butchered. And the question is, were Neanderthals producing beef jerky by heating up for preservation purposes? So great study just published. So the last 25 years, Australopithecus gari, 2.5 million years ago. I always like the blue infill. Had slightly larger back molars associated with the Oldowan industry. So here's an example of a pre-Homo using tools, basically. Tim White of Berkeley thinks they're basically related to Lucy afarensis, basically, but another candidate for an immediate ancestor to Homo. Aurorantugandensis, dated to 6 million years, the Tugan Hills in Kenya, possibly the earliest bipedality evidence, and we only have postcranial femur kinds of bones to see, but no cranials, and that sort of keeps it. Some people think this could in fact be Ardipithecus. And the bipedalism is inferred from the structure of the femur anatomy. The humerus and finger bone are definitely arboreal adaptations, but the femur is a little more human-like. Sahelanthropus, is this a hominin or a hominid or a hominoid? Found in the middle desert in Africa, Chad, dated to 7 to 6 million years ago. Remarkably complete, but totally distorted cranium that had to be computer reconstructed. And it is the largest brow ridge in any fossil that's been found that's a hominin type, smaller than Artie, and the foramen magnum, the spinal cord hole, the shape and its forward position is partially proposed as indicating bipedalism. And these are remakes and reconstructions, but the big question continues to be, is this a late Miocene ape as opposed to a hominin? Because this was the original, this was the assistant director. He's actually holding Tomai, and this were the bones. But note in this picture, no femur. The skull is in his hand. In the next picture, we get a femur, all right? And then this femur disappears for 20 years, okay? Some great stories in paleontology. So that's the cranium, and that's the disappearing femur. And the femur is hugely important because it tells us whether they were bipedal, and that's the current controversy, is was this a bipedal creature? And the question, did camel herders rebury this fossil facing Mecca? Okay. In 2020, the femur, an article finally comes out, but no top or bottom, which makes it much more difficult to interpret. And so this was probably the worst kept secret of paleontology in terms of where was this femur. Something was published in 2009, then a 2020 analysis indicating that they thought it was an ape, not a hominin. Then a 222 paper comes out describing it. It comes to the opposite conclusion, thinking there's more data that it was, in fact, biped. So don't expect a full resolution just yet, because the femur consists mostly of a shaft that doesn't have the joints. And so we don't actually know whether it walked upright. The ulnae, the arm muscles, bones are unquestionably chimpanzee-like and are clearly climbing trees adaptable. Paleanthropus platyops was found by Maeve Leakey, dated to 3.5 million years. Big flat face, small cheekbone teeth. And it's highly fragmented, and the individual pieces are greatly distorted. The cranium is deformed by matrix-filled cracks, and basically, again, Tim White thinks this is so severely distorted that it's not identifiable. He thinks it's afarensis, basically. Then in 1992, Tim White and gang discover Ardipithecus ramidus, 4.4 million years, nice skull features and lots of bones. But Tim takes 17 years to publish. Okay, he is the academic scientist type, basically. And as you'll see, has some major critiques of others in the field. But it's the first substantial fossil evidence about the possible appearance of the last common ancestor of humans and chimps. It's unlike chimpanzees. They did not knuckle walk. Chimp feet are specialized for grasping trees. Ramidus feet are better suited for walking. The canines are smaller. and they make some interesting conclusions about basically smaller canines indicate reduced male-to-male conflict, increased pair bonding, increased parental involvement. Then comes Artie Kadaba. This one is 1.5 million years older. I think probably ancestral to Artie ramidus, similar to Sahelanthropus in features, but we only have some postcranials and a mandible and teeth. They have 17 specimens from at least 5. So the case of this one again being hominin is also debated. It does have an anterior form of magnum, which is a bipedal indicator, but grasping feet. Then comes Homo erectus at Dmanisi, Georgia. So Africa up here above Turkey is Dmanisi, but at 1.8 million years. Although pretty soon we have a whole bunch in China. This is the earliest known hominin to leave Africa, Homo erectus, basically. This is showing small habilis-like skulls with Homo erectus-like features under a medieval church. No evidence of fire, Oldowan tool technology, 4 feet tall. It's among the smallest erecti, brain sizes, 545 to 775, dated to about 1.8 million years. Probably, these are the 5 skulls. The suspicion is that these were the victims of saber-toothed lions, basically. Called Homo georgicus by the Russians, who were the ones that found these guys. This was the most recent specimen coming out of the ground, skull 5. It is probably the most perfect skull ever discovered because it's totally complete. I keep getting people waiting in the waiting room messages. And so it's the world's first completely preserved adult hominin skull. It's beautifully preserved, basically. And one of them has the perfect puncture marks related to a saber-tooth's upper canine. So this was a tough region to live in, basically. So no fire, Oldowan tools, very poor brain, relatively speaking, compared, not much frontal lobe, relatively speaking. And then we have the old timer. One of them has totally lost his teeth, and there was complete reabsorption of the tooth sockets, which meant that he lived for a while after he lost all of his teeth, which means that basically this is a potential example of empathy and caretaking almost 2 million years ago. Again, sociality was the way we survived. And this is a good example to point out. There are postcranials available for this group. They think the brain size, habilis was around 614, erecti are typically around the 1,000 mark, and these guys are in between there. The later Asiatic erecti, like Peking man at 400K, and the Indonesian Sanjaran group who disappear at around 143, these guys are up to 1,100 cc's. So they ended up moving around, and as we'll see, there's a connection to some islands as well. So Dmanisi's brain, Indonesian erecti brain, significantly larger. And then in 2020, the smallest Homo erectus cranium was discovered with some small tools at Gona, Ethiopia. So these skulls were very small. Interestingly, they were found with both Oldowan and Acheulean mode stone tools. So they were using both at this date of 1.5 million years. So Oldowan, classic Acheulean assemblages. Then they discover a Homo ergaster skull that they date to just around 2 million years, which makes it the oldest erecti skull available, and older than Dmanisi, but also they find a Paranthropus bozi skull, the same age, quite nearby. All right, so the two oldest versions of these two that have been discovered. In the nearby territory, we've got Sediba and Paranthropus robustus. So examples of how multiple species in nearby territories not messing with each other for all we know, or who knows, okay? But complementarity. This is the Homo erectus skull. This is the Paranthropus skull, and partial identification because of their giant molars. In 2003, Tim White discovers the Hurto skull at 160K. It's one of the first examples where they start talking about globularity, anatomically modern humans because of the skull shape. But even this one is not totally globular. That doesn't actually happen until about 100K. So found with hippocabs and tools. Then they find some tools again at Ghana with no hominin remains that are Oldowan, and these were at the time the oldest Oldowan tools. Then in Europe in 2003, in Romania at Oase, they discover a 38K hominin, modern human, they believe. But in 15 years later, they do the DNA and they discover he's got almost 10% Neanderthal DNA. So he's got a great-great-grandparent who was a full Neanderthal. And as we'll see, almost all of the early hominins that modern humans, African modern human foragers who came into Europe around 45K, all have Neanderthal DNA in them. So these are the ones today: Zlatykun, Oase, Ustisham in Russia, and in Bulgaria, the Bakokiro cave are all in this time period when we moved out of Africa probably in 50 to 60, but didn't enter Europe for another 10 to 15K. Nobody knows why. All right, probably because the Neanderthals were there, but all of them that we have currently discovered have Neanderthal DNA. The other, these guys down here all have much longer Neanderthal DNA fragments. The characteristics of whether something is ancient DNA-wise is how big are the DNA fragments. Typically less than 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter kind of routine, but these guys had much longer sequences that were fully DNA than we have today with our 2%. So this is just the quick migration out of Africa routine. Somewhere between 50 to 70 is the big push out. We've developed into what's considered anatomically modern humans and basically are hunter-gatherers, dark-skinned. We get to Australia by 65K. We're in Asia by 45K and move into Europe. We come across the Varangian Strait at around 25K and into the Americas, basically. This is the only artwork that I've seen that's been attributed to Homo erectus, dated at 500K. Basically, someone was carving some upside down V's, and it's attributed to Homo erectus. Okay. Then comes the big surprise of 2004. This is the Lingbao cave in Flores in Indonesia. The island is right next to Komodo Island. It's a giant cave, and this is the area where they found LB1, Flo, the hobbits, got nicknamed pretty quickly by two Australian, Morwood and Brown, led the expedition. And it gets announced big time in the press, 1 meter tall, and we have a bunch of cranials, comparison to a modern human skull. So quite small. Originally considered to have survived there until about 12,000 K, but new dating puts it at 100 to 60 K. Is the new dates. There are points, blades, and microblades that are dated to 190 to 50K. And these were associated with a dwarf elephant stegodon. So these guys lived concurrently with sapiens and Neanderthal in Europe, but obviously never connected with each other. But diminutive. 3 feet tall, okay? And these are the post-cranials. They got more than plenty of places to do. They hunted giant rats, Komodo dragons, 7-foot storks, and dwarf stegodon elephants. So a weird island. These two guys dwarfed. These guys grew extra big. Okay, that's what happens when you get trapped on an island for hundreds of thousands of years. I was born on the island of Malta, and we have stegodon dwarf elephants on the island like Crete does, etc. So islands are interesting evolutionary workshops. Huge controversy at the beginning, multiple hypotheses. The first one was that this is a Homo sapiens with a pathology. It is not a new species. It is a sick hobbit. Theories of microcephaly, malformed human pygmy, Laron, genetic syndrome, cretinism, etc. Nobody buys that anymore. Second hypothesis is an early arrival of a primitive hominin, i.e. habilis, from 2 or 3 million years ago. Last hypothesis, this is a later arriving Homo erectus, and that Flores is basically an example of an erectus having insular dwarfism, that if you get onto an island and are big and there's not enough food, you begin getting smaller. And that is currently the leading theory, although the last big study by Debbie Argue thinks again that it's a sister clade to Homo habilis. So the controversy goes on. The latest dating puts them again at 100 to 60K, the bones that were found. And they're gone by about 50K because at 46K, you get a layer of modern humans in the cave. But again, continued questioning of Flo and how she got there, etc. they've attempted DNA on flow and it didn't work. There are present day Flores pygmies. So dwarfism happened twice on Flores, once with Floresiensis and this other interesting group. This modern human group, who are pygmies, have no chin, okay, interestingly. And when they did the DNA of this group, they show that they had a Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry, modern human ancestry, but no traces of any ghost trace that could indicate Flo and her gang being connected. They're not. Previously, there had been ongoing excavation at a place called Matamenge, which is about 70 miles from the cave. And they found 3,000 animals, fossils, 1,500 stone. They've got large stegodons, not dwarf, and large Komodo dragons at this site, giant rats as well. And they've dated this group to at least 700K. So there's this alternate group and the discovery of an even smaller jaw that's 28% smaller than the hobbits at Liangboao. This group may have stood 2 feet tall, okay? So in comparison to Flo's jaw, this is the size of their jaw. So we have a pre-existing, they have not named this species, okay? They just think of it as ancestral to the Flo group on the island. DNA extraction has failed, and so continuing to come information, basically. In 2018, they discover 57 stone tools dated to around 700K and associated with a rhinoceros Philippinensis skeleton that's been cut, marked, and butchered. And they think this was probably Homo erectus on the island here in the Philippines with these stone tools. They haven't actually said Homo erectus, but that's the thinking. And the idea for these islands is that there was a tsunami wave or a floating island of land and wood debris that detached during a typhoon and ended up on the island is how these guys get there. I'm betting that the Indonesia in the next 20 years is going to be a hotbed of discoveries, okay? We will see. And then, of course, another one. Flo was not alone. Homo luzonensis on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, the big island. They find teeth, part of a femur, and some hand bones, more molars then, and then 12 more specimens, which are both modern and primitive looking. And they attempts at DNA were unsuccessful, but they name it as a new species. There are at least 3 individuals here with some parts of femur and a bunch of teeth and some very curved finger bones. So again, like Flo, a kind of mosaic, basically. Capable of walking, but also capable of climbing. These clearly indicate that evolution of hominins is not linear. Okay, here we have at the same time period modern humans, with big brains in Africa. And then we've got these small-brained, small-sized hominins in the island. So it clearly challenges the outdated idea that human line neatly progressed from less advanced to more advanced, smaller to larger brain, etc. We need to keep thinking our model is more like a bush, a braided stream, etc. One of the questions I liked when I showed the chimpanzee skull is that chimps and us separated 7 million years ago and lived in African rainforests. They did since then. We've got a multitude of human ancestor fossil bones. And the question I asked the people in front of me, how many fossilized chimpanzee bones do we have? Anybody that know the answer?
None.
Okay, well, the answer is none. Okay, 7 million years, no fossil chimp bones or gorilla bones. The only findings by McBrayer and Jablonski is that they, in 2005, discovered 500,000-year-old chimp teeth. These teeth right here. That is the entire collection of chimpanzee fossils. Okay, and remember that 7 million-year-old Sahelanthropus lived in a forest, but was found when it became desert. Okay, these are the only gorilla fossils that we have. So fossil preservation is the issue here. Only 10% of Africa has been explored. Not all environments are conducive to fossil preservation. Rainforest floors are acidic, and as a consequence, they eat bone. And these are the only ones we found, high levels of humic acid in forest soil. Bernard Wood from Washington, who I love, is unconvinced of these arguments and thinks we just haven't found them, okay? That they're out there somewhere, just like Sahelanthropus, we eventually will. And just, I love this picture because it shows, this is a display of all of the Afarensis specimens that we have. This is Lucy over here. By 2009, we've got 400 specimens. We've got 96 Lucy-style Afarensis skulls, okay? Lots of repetition of the same skeletal elements to tell us exactly what they look like. And the first family, that's a title given to a group of 13 individuals, this is that group here, okay? And not to think of Afarensis as a 3.5-foot character. This is Australopithecus kadanumu from around 3.6 million years, same time as Lucy or so. Big man, this guy was 5'5", okay? So whether this was the dimorphic male sex version of Afarensis kinds of species, so chimpanzee, us, him, and Lucy for comparison, okay? So lots of variability out there historically. Then we get our place's hotshot Salam, discovered by Zareh al-Ged, and the earliest Afarensis child that we have, basically at 3.3 million years. Okay, and of course it took Zareh 6 years to get this fossil out of the stone. Okay, good tail.
Snow.
Skull. Stone, sorry, you're right. So this is a Dakika. And then Zareh also became famous because he claimed that a cut bone at Dakika at 3.4 million years showed that Australopithecus were eating meat and using tools. Okay, there are 12 cut marks on 2 specimens. It was highly controversial. at the time, but a researcher named Jessica Thompson did an amazing statistical study of 4,000 bones around the same site and showed that the cut marks were consistently more like those made by a stone tool rather than by either being bitten or being tromped upon. So supporting his idea that this, in fact, was an accurate conclusion that, again, Australopithecines were using stone tools at 3.4. Minot 1 was found in 2008, a clearly modern skull, but it's got a bun. And what are buns historically characteristic of? It's Neanderthal skull sign. And so they think this is a modern human Neanderthal hybrid, older than the Oasis modern human that we just talked about. And they consider this the first physical evidence that supports an out of Africa theory at this time. Just for a quick comment, we've got lots of cut mark data to indicate that everybody used toothpicks forever, okay? Habilis, Ergaster, Neanderthal at Crepina and El Cidron in Spain, et cetera, okay? Then comes 2008, Sediba. Lee Berger, I have a mixed relationship with him in terms of my opinions, so beware. He was in South Africa, University of Witwatersrand, 30 years of no major fossil discoveries. And then in 2008, his son, Matthew, stumbles across a bone that turns out to be Australopithecus sediba. He's also famous for the Tong child bird prey hypothesis, that there's good evidence that the Tong child was lunch for an African eagle. Okay, that's how he died. And then in 2015, of course, comes Homo naledi. So Lee Berger loves press coverage, okay? That's how he makes his money, gets lots of funding, et cetera, but he loves doing the press before he writes the articles. His son Matthew, at the age of 9, stumbled on a stone that had a nice bone sticking out of it, and that's how at Malapa, South Africa, Australopithecus sediba was discovered. He claimed originally that it was ancestral to modern humans, but it ain't. 1.98 million years ago. They think mother and child had a fatal fall into this cave, which is where they found them. 2 partial skeletons dated to right around 2 million years ago. And Will Kimball from Arizona thinks that it's a sister species to Africanus. They walked like a man, but swung like a chimp, basically. So they were bipedal, but indications that they were quite capable of climbing. They're not ancestral because they lived later than the earliest known member of the Homo genus. So that hypothesis is probably wrong. And then teeth plaque that was taken, the calculus, is the first direct evidence what any Australopith ate, and they implied that they were almost eating exclusively C3 kinds of food from a closed forested region like today's chimps, tree leaves, fruits, wood, bark, grasses, sedges, those kinds of things. This is the little silica that can be found in plants and can tell you information about them. And this is the most recent reconstruction of Mama sediba. And then 2010 comes, a year after I joined the academy, and basically the ancient DNA bubble bursts open, basically. We get Svante Pääbo's Leipzig, Germany group comes out with the Neanderthal genome. Then the Denisovan genome, the first hominin species discovered solely by DNA. We discovered that 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, 5 to 6% Denisovan DNA in Melanesians, New Guineans, 0.2% in Asians and Native Americans. And then more recently, the fact that even the San of the Kalahari have 0.3% Neanderthal DNA. So I used to say all modern humans except Africans have 1 to 2%. Now you got to modify that. And the reason for the Africans getting Neanderthal DNA is that probably 20 or 30,000 years ago, there was a black flow from Asia and Europe back into Africa, and more sex and more introgression of DNA between groups. We'll talk all about this in part 2, okay, if you're interested. The skin color, they now think of the original European hunter-gatherers that came out of Africa was basically dark skin until as recently as about 9,000 years ago. Farmers arriving from Anatolia were lighter, and then eventually the Yan Maya from Russia had more light variants. So light skin captures more vitamin D, but the early hunter-gatherers managed with their dark skin because probably they were getting their vitamin D from the meat, the venison they were eating. Today's Inuit have dark skin because they have a rich diet of vitamin D from organ meats of marine mammals. So you can be dark and still get your vitamin D. And then David Reich thinks that the shift to agriculture.
And the rest of the UK.
Sorry, hold on.
Bill Marks reporting. Contracts.
Alarm. He thinks the shift to agriculture reduced the intake of vitamin D and led to eventually lighter skin as well. This is the famous Laetoli fossil footprint track that was dated to 3.7, and that some version of Australopithecus afarensis showed us that they were walking bipedally, just like us. This is the Site G trackway, okay? Afarensis, 69 stunningly human-like footprints. But there is a Site A, okay, which is a couple of kilometers away, less known, and originally they were thought to be bear tracks. The important is to note the divergent toe, okay? This is Site G, afarensis. And this is another hominin that was making its way pretty much at the same time. So again, contemporarity, okay, of species. Then they discover Daramida in Ethiopia. Probably many consider this a variant population of afarensis, basically. Okay, not many people talk about it. But then much more importantly, at Ledi Geraru, they discovered this jaw, and it's dated to 2.8 million years and is now considered the oldest Homo fossil that we have, okay? So the thinking is that at around 3 million years ago, the ape-like Australopithecus afarensis die out and then are superseded by one Paranthropus with its big teeth and strong jaw muscles, and the Homo lineage, which is smaller teeth and much larger brains, okay? These are the fossils. It's the oldest known Homo lineage. The teeth become more slender. Some people think that the leading edge of the origin of the genus Homo is our teeth, not our brain, and that you don't need big jaws and teeth if you have stone tools to process food, but this will be challenged this year, as we'll see. They then do a digital reconstruction of one of the original Homo habilis, and their cranial size is much bigger than the old 600 mark. They think it's somewhere in the 700 to 800 cc range. The mandible is remarkably primitive, and more similar to Afarensis than to Erectus. And so Homo habilis, early Homo erectus, Homo rudolfensis, a larger version of habilis, can't be distinguished by their brain size. Okay, so there's lots of mixing going on. This is on these teeth, they found the earliest evidence for right-handedness in Homo habilis because of the way he missed the meat he was cutting and cut his teeth going in an oblique angle that indicates he was right-handed. Okay. And then, most importantly, hugely important, at Lomekwi near Turkana, Kenya, they discover stone tools that are dated to 3.3 million years ago, clearly predating any known Homo fossil. And they think these are larger and slightly less sophisticated than the Oldowan, and unlike Oldowan being hit from one hand to the other hand, they think they were using stones to hit an anvil stone to break them up. And this methodology is almost identical to what modern day chimpanzees use to break up nuts, as an example. So here, the best current evidence for Australopithecines using tools before we did, okay? And some people now think that stone tool using may not be a marker of Homo sapiens, but in fact of the last common ancestor. So we will see. Okay. And then 2015, they discover these modern human teeth in South China, dated to 120K. So 60 years before the Great Migration out of Africa. Another indication that we were actually Africans of a human type were moving out of Africa multiple times before 60K. Okay, and this is one of the first to indicate that. It's likely that we actually left Africa, headed to Asia first, and then returned to Europe at around 40K or so. And then an amazing group of fossils at the Cima de los Huesos, pit of bones in Atapuerca, Spain. It was originally considered Heidelbergensis, but the oldest, the current DNA data indicates otherwise, okay? So they clearly have Neanderthal features. The original mitochondrial study said it's a distant Denisovan ancestry. And then in 2015, the nuclear DNA said, nope, these are Neanderthals. So these are the earliest Neanderthals that we have, dated to 426K, which is the oldest dated Homo DNA. And the skull 5 that we have in the collection, the one with sort of the broken teeth and the hole in his left side of the skull, is the actual skull that they got this DNA from his a bone in his ear region. This immediately said that the divergence between modern humans and Neanderthals had to be earlier than they used to think, and now it's dated to 550 to 750K. And that the divergence between Neanderthals and Denisovans came later at around 400, 450 or so. And then increasingly, we're seeing sort of a RIP for Heidelbergensis. The historical theory is because of the kinds of skulls that they found in Europe, the Maurer jaw, that Heidelbergensis represented a transition between Homo erectus and modern humans and Neanderthal. And that Heidelbergensis was in effect the ancestor of both sapiens and in Africa and Neanderthal in Europe. The classic dates are 700 to 200K or so. But there's increasing controversy as to the specificity of this species because too many varying kinds of skulls have been put into this group. And then with the recent new datings of the Broken Hill skull in Africa to 300K and the Jebel Irhoud modern human skull at 315K, both Chris Stringer and Hublin in France now believe that Heidelbergensis is only the ancestor of Neanderthal in Europe, but not of us in Africa. And this comes on the heel of this new theory called multi-regionalism in Africa, which we don't have time today, but basically the idea is that there's no single homeland on anatomically modern humans in Africa, that East Africa is not the Eden of us all, but that modern Homo sapiens is a blend of a whole bunch of interconnections all over Africa. That's the gist of the multi-regional theory. Then comes the major discovery in 2015, Homo naledi and Berger kissing the skull, okay? This is an amazing discovery. There's no question about that. It's been called the King Tut's tomb of paleoanthropology, one of the most staggering findings in the history of paleoanthropology, discovered by Lee Berger's team. It's a great story. If you haven't read it, you should read it. I'll just give you a couple of highlights. But it's the richest assembly of fossil hominins ever discovered. It actually doubled the number of fossils that have been discovered in Africa. In 50 years of excavating at Olduvai, they only found 100 hominin. They have found more than 2,000 in the new collection. And they have every single bone element of the skeleton in multiple versions, multiple ages, etc. The Rising Star Cave, the Denalidi chamber, where much of this discovery happened. The entrance is up here. You have to go down in pitch blackness originally. There's the Superman crawl area. You have to then climb. And before you get to the chute that leads down to the Denalidi chamber, you have to go through a 50-foot length tube that's only 7 inches this wide, okay? Imagine doing this, okay? It all starts with 2 spelunkers in 2013, Steve Tucker, an accountant, and Rick Hunter, a Mensa member who was kicked out of high school for blowing up the chemistry lab. He's a construction worker. They love to do caves, all right? And one night, after 4 hours of exploring, he leans up against something and realizes there's a shaft. He doesn't know how far the shaft is or that it doesn't open onto a 1,000-foot empty hole, okay? These guys are stunningly either stupid or adventurous. And at the end of the chute, this is where you end up before you eventually hit the floor. They didn't have a rope in the first climb. And this was the first climb into the shaft that leads to the cavern. Incredibly tight spaces. And then they come down and there are 400 bones just sitting on the surface. Hugely important one. But it turns out they're not the first ones in the cave, okay? They're old survey pegs. Evidence that some of the fossils on the floor had been moved and broken because there are white ends on some of the bones. Berger next sends his 14-year-old son down with Tucker and Hunter. And this is one of the first sites, and this is the jawbone. Berger sends these photos to John Hawks in Wisconsin and Steve Churchill, who famous Neanderthal specialist. And in Facebook on October 6, 2013, they put out the following ad. I need the help of the whole community to reach out to as many related professional groups as possible. We need individuals with excellent archaeological and excavation skills for a short project. The catch is the person must be skinny and preferably small. They can't be claustrophobic. They need caving experience and willing to work in very cramped quarters. We will cover the flight, the field accommodations, and the food, but no pay, okay? 170 people, or actually, this is wrong, about 170 people originally applied with only a couple of men. Berger's secretary asked him, "What are you doing? I have a bunch of messages from women giving me their body dimensions," okay? So they set up a 21-day dig, National Geographic and PBS Nova crew. They photograph everything and they put it on the internet. This is, he gets credit for that in terms of sort of universalizing a new finding, basically. And they do massive amounts of photography, videotaping. They put in cabling all over. And these 6 women are the ones that went down first, and they're all larger than the largest Homo naledi male. But they brought out the largest assembly of fossil humans ever discovered in Africa. Berger and Hawks had to look at it all on TV monitors above ground and sort of tell them what to do and what to look for. But a whole bunch of them looked like they had in fact been recently broken. And this is the jaw bone that led to lots of excitement, basically. Clearly a skull. So molar progression in hominins is really important to tell you how old they are. Note first, second, third molar, smallest is the smallest. Last is the largest. In modern humans, it's the reverse direction.
What?
Somebody is talking? Oh, sorry. Okay. So that's how you tell, basically, whether it's a modern molar setup or a more ancient ones. And Homo naledi had the ancestral condition with third molar being the largest. And they've got lots and lots and lots of teeth, basically. Lots of ages, going from toddler to elder. But interestingly, the chipping pattern, this group is heavily chipped, indicating that their diet was heavy on hard and gritty objects. So these guys should be called the nutcracker people, not Paranthropus. And baboon chip pattern, basically, who also tend to eat a lot of tubers, dirt-covered kinds of stuff. So a comment about potentially what diet they were doing. And this was silt, not breccia concrete like in the South African caves. They needed toothpicks, not hammers, basically, to get these fossils out. And climbing in and out, okay, resulted in lots of abrasions, okay. They then do a workshop. They bring in lots of early career paleontologists, which was a good mark, but it also didn't necessarily bring in expertise. In September 2015, they announced it to the world, New York Times. They also put up 3D printing of a whole bunch of the bones from the cave, including the skull, if you can afford doing a download and then doing the 3D printing of it, okay? This is what they found. They found 400 bones simply lying on the chamber floor. And this is a 1 meter by 1 meter deep excavation site, which was what they originally did and what the publication papers are all about, okay? It was basically a sea of bones. Rick kicked the dirt and hominins fell out, basically. They've taken 30,000 photos of the entire chamber. There are originally 15 individuals with 1,500 bones, and by 2022, there are 25 individuals with 2,000 bones, compared to Sterkfontein in South Africa, which had 700 bones in 70 years. So this was a massive collection, basically, just a beautifully, profoundly important discovery. Lots of hand bones, rib bones, pelvic bones, 190 teeth, beautiful feet, okay? And so you can think of Naledi as a 5 foot skinny version of Homo erectus. And that's one of the contentions, is in fact, he is simply an alternate version of Homo erectus that got isolated in South Africa. Homo naledi Lucy, in effect, okay, for comparison. And the age distribution is really interesting because 8 of the 13 are not adults. So this rules out that this was cave exploration by isolated adult males. That's not the pattern here. It looks like a group entered and didn't get out. And again, here we have a bush of 3 different Homo species at the same time. Here, habilis, rudolfensis, erectus, again, showing no linear progression, basically. And most of these newer findings are all anatomic mosaics, that they are have shown features that are ancestral and derived at the same time. And the old idea of a rough order of increasing brain size has now been falsified. Species with small brains lived both early and late in the evolution of Homo. We've got habilis, naledi, floresiensis to comment upon. And that smaller teeth, it raises a question mark. That tooth size historically was thought of as having a similar trend as brain size. Smaller teeth, bigger brain was the association. But these guys mess this idea up. It's got small teeth, but a small brain. And it shared the same ecological niche as some archaic and modern humans as well. So be wary of the idea of competition between species, because it may fool you. So mosaic traits. The Homo naledi is human when it interacts with the environment. So feet, teeth, foot are all Homo-like. But it's like Australopithecine, means ancestral on the inside stuff, pelvis, etc. Okay. And interestingly, Naledi and Sediba are the exact opposite in this regard. They've got derived skull, teeth, legs, and hands, whereas that's ancestral in Sediba, and the opposite pattern for shoulders, etc. So an interesting sort of mirror opposite imaging. Okay. They were clearly arboreal than the other homos at the time. They clearly were able to climb and suspend themselves, so they weren't just walking. And their gait apparently looked somewhat different. This is one of the skulls from the Dinalidi cave. This is the holotype. Very small brain, size of an orange, okay? But advanced enough to be called Homo. And only the smallest species of habilis, one of erectus, and no floresiensis overlap these values there. The hands are beautiful, okay? And they were found exactly sitting the way they looked, basically, but amazingly curved, which means that they were built for arboreal existence, and incredibly diminutive, okay, compared to us. And this is an incredibly beautiful foot that was articulated just like that when they found it. It's the most complete foot in the history of discoveries, basically. And this is John Gurchi's reconstruction of what he thought. It took him 700 hours to come up with this. The hugest controversy of all was when Lee Berger concludes his journal article with the proposition that he thinks that they were burying their dead. Okay, the bodies were deliberately disposed. That they were bringing in bodies over time, because some of the bone layering, etc., seemed to indicate that it wasn't just one group that ended up in there. And so their conclusion of this body disposal idea was that only Naledi fossils were found in the chamber. There are a couple of bird bones and a couple of rodent bones. The bones are well preserved, they're lightly mineralized. The sediments in the chamber aren't from an external source. The bodies were intact on arrival. There are no green fractures in that light. There's no evidence of a catastrophe which killed all the individuals inside the chamber. There's no predation on the bones. This is not a living chamber where they set up fires, etc. There's no evidence of flooding that would have brought them in. The bodies were not all deposited at the same time, so it was a repeat event at least once. The alternative theory, of course, was that this was some kind of death trap, that they entered because of predators or thunder or whatever and couldn't get out. Remember, this was a totally, absolutely pitch black cave, okay, underground. They don't know that there was ever another opening to this cave. And these death trap scenarios can't be ruled out, but the original authors poo-poo them, basically. Obviously, bones of contention. Other scientists have submitted controversial stuff. So Berger submitted 12 papers to Nature. After anonymous peer review, the papers were rejected. The editors asked Berger to revise them. After several back and forth, he withdrew all of them and eventually published them in eLife, which is peer-reviewed, but open journals like this accept 25% compared to 7% by Science and Nature. eLife charges $2,500 for publication. Brianna Pobner says, dead people smell bad and attract predators. A cave would be a good place to keep them for a while, from which you hang out. So I can see chucking bodies into a cave so you wouldn't be the next one eaten for dinner. an African researcher said that he thinks that they went into the cave running away from some kind of disaster and ended up trapped there. And lots of questions have been raised. How old are they? In 2015, we didn't know. There was a rush to publish. Research was done hastily. Is this a new species or a version of Erectus? The burial controversy, too many early researchers, too much media. Was there damage done to the... Back in 2000, Berger wrote a book called The Footsteps of Eve that was published. And then Tim White wrote an article on the state of paleoanthropology in response. And he drew a distinction between the scientists versus the careerists, warning that irresponsible proclamations momentarily seize the public's attention in popular news and go straight into the textbooks, and the retractions rarely do. Okay, Tim White does not like Lee Berger. It's pretty clear. And White thinks it's a variant of Homo erectus, not a new species. And so lots of controversy. John Hawkes contends that it isn't Homo erectus. Zeray thinks it's an unprecedented landmark finding, but it represents variation within one species. And he thinks it's probably derived from Homo erectus. And interestingly, both with Naledi, Floresiensis, we've got these lots and lots of bones, and they keep trying to do phylogenetic placement, taking one characteristic, comparing it to all others, and then trying to figure out where they originated. And basically, they keep coming up with conflicting results. So the phylogenetic attempts have not yet. DNA has not succeeded in any of them, and they need to now do proteomics, basically, to try to help figure out the phylogeny of these guys. So lots of continuing questions in this regard. Fabulous find, but lots of questions, basically. And then they do the dating, and it turns out to be exactly identical to Jebel Erhoud in Morocco, Broken Hill in Zambia, and Naledi comes in at 300K. Okay, so they're right at the same time. At least these bones are 300K. We don't know when they started or when they disappeared. Okay, so continued mysteries, and that was based on geological analysis, but we still have lots of questions there. And then in 2017, after having been discovered by Rick and Steve in 2013, a new chamber called the Lasidi chamber, which is unconnected to the Dinalidi cave, and it's 80 meters away in a different cave, basically. There's no geological connection between the two caves. And so between the two, they now have about 2,000 bones in both chambers, 130 in the new one, in 3 separate collection sites in the new cave. And there's a new skeleton called Neo in the new cave that's interesting. But they now think there are about 25 different individuals based on the number of same teeth in the 2 chambers. This is the original Dinalidi cave, and this is the new Lasidi chamber, but not connected. This is a massive cave system, by the way, and who knows, okay? So again, sort of more challenges to some of our thinking. The persistence of small-brained humans for so long kind of reverses our previous conception that larger brain would necessarily lead to an evolutionary advantage. Their mosaic anatomy expands the known range of variation in Homo. Evolution depends on adaptation to an ecological variation and not to larger brains, basically. And remember that we keep finding different species of these groups in the same place at the same time. So lots of bush differences, basically. In the new cave, they discovered the first child of 6 years of age that they put together, okay, called Letty. They think 4 to 6 years old. Teeth, skull bone parts, basically. A third, an 8 to 11-year-old juvenile, has some postcranials. This is Neo's skull and his skeleton. You need to be careful about the skeletons because they're put together by all kinds of bones. It isn't necessarily the original same person, but this is a very nice skull, basically. 610 cc, so the classic cortical Rubicon level. This is Lacity and this is Dinalati, the two different skulls. And this is Lucy and this is Neo. They've even done an attempt at, they did a brain endocast. Holloway did a brain endocast. They were hunting for Broca's area. And in modern humans, Broca's area is the language known for its language expression ability. But originally, it was the manual stone-making region of the brain. And that's an interesting connection between the kind of hierarchical step system that you have to do to carve a bone, may have the connection why this area got absconded for language in terms of hierarchical grammar, etc. But Holloway thinks this could be Broca's. Falk, his longtime nemesis, she disagrees, okay? And this is the most recent reconstruction of Neo. So 2 caves, no connection, no stone tools. Did they fall in, get pushed in, etc.? And then, of course, new cave. But this one is not Homo naledi. This is an old Breccia, South Africa style cave that they have found a whole bunch of new bones. They have built a stairway going in. Apparently, it was the site of a movie at one point because there's lots of movie evidence in it. And this has not been published yet. So the implication, it's been sort of transformative in some ways, but evolution clearly produced different types of Homos originated in parallel in different parts of Africa. Were there hybridizations? We don't know. Were they dead ends? Probably. Is there a point at which we become human, or are there multiple ways to be human? Most likely. Okay. And apart from our language capacity, it's really important to remember that no modern human uniqueness claim has survived unmodified for more than 10 years since it was made. Tool use, tool making, culture, food sharing, theory of mind, planning ability, empathy, inferential reasoning have all now been observed in wild primates. Frans de Waal says, it's an odd coincidence that naledi is an anagram for denial. I like that one. We're trying way too hard to deny that we're modified apes, and we are one rich collection of mosaics, genetically, anatomically, and mentally as well, okay? Some of the lessons, some of the hallmarks of being human, such as efficient bipedalism, fine motor skills are not dependent on a big brain. Naledi reaffirms that evolution, like evolution of all groups, is not patterned like a ladder, but rather like a deeply pruned bush. We should never expect a new fossil find to have a predicted set of traits that perfectly links it between two other species, nor should we use value-laden terms like primitive to describe species, most of which successfully lived on the planet for far longer than we did, okay, or have, all right? The finding that most of these guys are mosaics of ancestral and derived features. You can't now predict, if you find a little bone piece, predict what the rest of the skeleton is going to look like, because all of these guys turn out to be weird blends of ancestral, derived, etc. And what we thought evolved together don't: teeth and brain, smaller teeth, bigger brain, etc. Lots of unresolved questions. We don't know when Naledi arose or went extinct. We don't know whether they intermixed with other species. Berger raises a question that we now don't know the origin of the African Middle Stone Age, which everybody thought happened at around 300K. But was it us? Was it Naledi, etc., he claims. And the one thing I do like about Lee Berger is he came up with the metaphor of a braided stream as being the way evolution works, that divergence from a common ancestor then coalesce again, then split again, then recombine again. And it's difficult to tell which branch was responsible for us being here today, basically. So what happened in Africa. Then things to come. Originally, one of the good things that Lee Berger decided to do was that he used Google Earth to begin looking at patterns of where trees and water and caves existed in South Africa. And he's discovered 800 caves, at least 250 maybe fossil sites, okay? So lots to come, basically. And then, of course, always wanting to be in the news, late last year, he loses 50 pounds and ends up finally in the Dinaledi cavern, where no evidence in 15 years of searching has been found for fire. And of course, what does he declare? He declares that Homo naledi controlled fire. I looked up and I realized the ceiling was black, it was burnt, it was covered in soot, it had been right above our heads the entire time. And none of the other researchers had noticed this, interestingly. Huge lumps of charcoal, thousands of burnt bones, giant herds, clay, baked clay. His partner, an African researchers, Mulapayan, said pieces of bone, burnt bone, which indicates they were eating here. So this was a news conference, okay? They've published nothing about this, okay? So keep your fingers crossed. 2016, 97, 1.5 million year old footprints of Homo erectus along a lakeside, I think Turkana in Illoret in Kenya. Okay, so they were sort of walking along a stream. They think they were probably hunting or foraging at this spot. And some beautiful footprints that look exactly like ours, basically. Wrong date there. And then we have Ron Clark, discovery of Littlefoot and Australopithecine, where there's a controversy as to which Australopithecine. But he basically found a box with a couple of bones in it and sent his two African assistants down to the cave to see if they could find where they had been clipped off in the wall. After 2 days of hunting, they find them. And then for the next 15 years, those two assistants have been digging out this fossil, basically. Incredible job, right? And it is the most complete fossil hominin skeleton dating back to either 2.2 or 3.6 million years ago. It's the oldest fossil hominin skeleton ever found in South Africa per Clark. And he named it Australopithecus prometheus, which was what was given a name in 1948 to another fragmentary fossil. But it's a beautifully preserved, incredible work by these two assistants, and nicknamed Littlefoot, basically, and was finally publicized after 15 years of work. The big debate is about how old it actually is, okay, and the species designation. And then in 2017, this jumps into our DNA talk, but they discovered that you could actually look at strategic stratigraphic geological layers and find DNA alone in the sediment. This is an amazing discovery. There's little known about the source of the sediment DNA. Was it pee, pooping, spitting? We don't know, okay? The factors that affect its long-term preservation, the extent to which it may have been translocated from a different layer, okay, which is an issue in terms of dating. But basically, they looked at 5 different caves in Europe and Asia, and they found they were able to do species analysis based on some DNA that was found in the dirt of these caves without any fossil bone. An amazing achievement in terms of technology, including Denisovan and Neanderthal DNA in the dirt, okay? They've now been doing research on the naked mole rat, showing that you can get DNA from the air, okay? So just some amazing stuff in terms of DNA ancient technology. So they found 9 hominin samples in this study, basically. And then in 2017, we get the Morocco Jebel Erhoud finding of the oldest Homo sapiens skull, dated to 315. So now it's the oldest modern human skull that we have. The brain capacity is very large, equivalent to our own, even larger. So this is what.
Charlie, we have about 10 more minutes left.
Okay. Sorry, I would like to suggest if you've had any question, please email me. Okay, so just I appreciate the time, but too much material. This is what the face looked like, very modern, but interestingly, the skull looks much more like Neanderthal. So we hadn't coalesced into our final form, but this is now in Morocco, of all places, okay? The oldest modern human. And it's a mosaic again, of course. And at 300K, we now have at least 8 hominin species on the planet living together, okay? Erectus sapiens, Neanderthal, Broken Hill, Denisovans, Flo, Luzon, and Naledi, okay? Lots of characters out there. We get to Australia by 65,000 years ago. Controversial, highly controversial study that found damaged mastodon bones in Santa Barbara, California, dating to 130K. They insist that this represented some hominin coming to America 100,000 years earlier than the standard 13K findings, okay? Nobody accepts it, basically. In Germany, they find a femur and do the DNA and discovered that it is a Neanderthal, but the mitochondria is modern human at 270K. All right, we'll discuss this a lot in the paleogenomics. It's a an amazing study. Okay, so we were in Germany 270,000 years ago, at least a former version of us, and we were mixing it with the Neanderthals. And then Homo antecessor from discovered in '94 in Spain near where the Simón de los Huesos are. But this is the oldest guy on the continent, basically, that we have a lot of material. And most interestingly, a flat face. Chris Stringer now thinks that flat face, like modern humans, is the ancient version, and that Neanderthals are the derived version. Okay, an interesting theory, but they're at the Gran Dolina area of Spain. And they're finally, they're with Oldowan tools, 15 individuals, and eventually they do the dating, and it turns out to be 770 to 950 or so. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's the dating range. Okay, so among the oldest or close to the oldest. Nearby, they discover a 1.4 million year old mandible that they think is also him. And they do some teeth proteomes and include old. This is the 1.4 million year old jawbone. And they think he had an amazingly modern looking face, basically, from the bone structuring, so that Stringer thinks ancient. Okay. They then discover that some species got to China at 2.1 million years compared to the 1.8 Dmanisi exit. And this is where the site right here, right? They were high up there. But they do not identify the species of Homo that they think did this, but almost everybody thinks it had to be Erectus. They find obsidian in Africa, indicating social networking at more than, at around 300K. This study, the oldest Israeli mandible from Ms. Leah that we got out of Africa at this date, but much of these earlier exits are clearly dead ends, didn't quite make it. Arabia at 85K, bones, finger bones from 85K. We'll skip flowstones. Modern human and Neanderthal skulls right next to each other, probably due to a mudslide. But again, in Greece, 210K, an earlier exit. Chimpanzees use tools, anvil with a stone to crack nuts. And turns out bonobos hunt Weyens-Dukers, antelopes, and chimps hunt Colobus monkeys. So they're hunting and using tools, okay? This is the oldest painting in the world at this point, 43.9 thousand year old in a Indonesian island with sort of antelope, pig creatures dated. We've said this one. They discover a full cranium of Anamensis, which is potentially related to Afarensis. We'll skip this guy, okay? Data of a successful leg amputation at 31K in Indonesia. And then the discovery at Mandarin Cave in France that there were layering of a Mousterian stone tools, then arrowheads, modern humans, then Mousterian stone tools, meaning at 54K, we were in Europe for a short periods in this study. And then a few months later, just a month ago, the stone tools were these microscopic arrowheads in the same layer at 54K. And they are claiming that modern humans used bow and arrow at this site. For me, this is like the Chateaubriand controversy, where basically they found these in a French cave and said they had to be modern human. They're too beautiful. But in fact, they eventually proved that they were Neanderthal, and discrimination against Neanderthal upper Paleolithic behavior, basically. Okay. Paolo gets the Nobel Prize last year for his ancient DNA work. And the last thing, Arctic desert in the Copenhagen Formation in Greenland. And they basically, this is 2 million years old. And they are basically taking sediment DNA at 2 million years. They're able to totally reconstruct what it looked like in a warmer climate when rabbits, plants, and mastodons were populating this area based on 2 million year old DNA. And we'll, I think, call it at that. Way too many slides. All right.
Yay, thank you, Charlie. I'm trying to find where my picture is, but I'm here. Does anyone have any last, there I am. Any last questions or anything? Just a couple more minutes.
As I said, there was too much material, and if you have any questions about any of it, email me, okay? charlesvella@comcast.net. I'm willing to talk to any of you. And as I said, there's simply too much material, so if you're interested in doing 2 more sessions, again, maybe the last Monday of the month for the next 2 months, I'm perfectly willing to do it. Simply email me, tell me your interest, and I'll set it up basically. Otherwise, any immediate questions?
All right, people are just saying thank you in the chat. Thank you, that was fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much, Charlie. I know this was a lot of work on your end, and it was super interesting, so I appreciate it. I'm sure everyone else thinks the same.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks,
And,
all. Have a good rest of your day.
good luck on the floor.
Bye.
Bye-bye.